Welcome to the fourth ESG Webcast. Today's topic is ESG reporting, focusing on the CSRD and the ESRS. My colleague Teresa Kühmeier and I will guide you through these topics. The Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, in short CSRD, has been enforced since the beginning of this year and now has to be implemented into national law. The CSRD represents a substantial expansion in terms of content in comparison to the NFRD, the Non-Financial Reporting Directive, which is already in force and already obligates certain companies to report on sustainability. In addition to the expansion of content, the CSRD also expands the number of companies affected by mandatory sustainability reporting, which I will discuss separately. The information that companies are required to disclose under the CSRD must generally be presented in the management report. The EFRAG, the European Financial Reporting Advisory Group, was commissioned to develop standards for sustainability reporting in accordance with the CSRD. The final draft of these standards, the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, in short ESRS, are already available. The CSRD also introduces an external audit requirement to ensure compliance with the reporting requirements. From 2024, an audit with limited assurance is planned, and from 2028, a reasonable assurance audit is planned. Now I would like to discuss the deadlines for when which companies are mandatory to report on sustainability. Since the financial year 2017, large corporations with more than 500 employees and of public interest have been required to report. The legal basis here is the already mentioned NFRD. As of financial year 2024, companies already subject to the NFRD must report in accordance with the CSRD. Starting in financial year 2025, large companies that meet two of the following criteria must also report. The criteria are balance sheet total above 20 million euros, turnover over 40 million euros, number of employees over 250. Listed SMEs, small and non-complex credit institutions, and captive insurance companies will also be directly affected by the CSRD. In addition, there are also reporting requirements that must be met by companies from third countries that fulfill certain criteria. There's also certain exemptions from the reporting obligation, namely the group privilege, where subsidiaries are exempt from the reporting obligation under certain circumstances. Companies that are required to report under the CSRD must apply the European Sustainability Reporting Standards. These standards were developed by EFRAG, and 12 sector-independent standards are already available in the final draft since November. In addition to the sector-independent standards, sector-specific standards are to follow. The standards available in the final draft can be divided into cross-cutting standards and topic-specific standards. The cross-cutting standards contain cross-standard disclosure requirements and also contain general reporting requirements. They, for example, explain the structure and procedure of reporting. The topic-specific standards can be divided into environment, social, and governance standards. These standards define certain disclosure requirements, including strategies, targets, and measures, as well as KPIs. There are 5 environmental standards, including, for example, a standard on climate change and one on pollution. In terms of social standards, there are 4 standards that address, among other things, the company's own workforce and the workforce within the value chain. Then there is a governance standard that deals with business conduct. If a company falls under the CSRD, it must report in accordance with the ESRS. There are standards and certain data points that must be reported mandatorily in any case by companies, and then, depending on the result of the materiality analysis, more must be reported in addition. The standards ESRS 2 and ESRS E1 must be reported in any case by all undertakings covered by the CSRD. In addition, certain data points that are required by EU law must also be reported on. If the reporting company has more than 250 employees, certain information about the S1 standard must also be disclosed. In addition, if defined as material in the materiality analysis, further data points must be disclosed. This means, for example, if the company has defined the topic of pollution as material in the materiality analysis, the company must also disclose the disclosure requirements concerning standard E2. At this point, I would like to hand over to my colleague Teresa Kühmeier, who will give you an insight into the concept of the double materiality analysis, as well as the contents of the individual ESRS.
The concept of double materiality is essential within the CSRD. Therefore, I will give a short summary, a short insight into double materiality and its materiality assessment. The result of the materiality assessment is that the company knows which topics are material and which are not. The CSRD says that if a topic is material, it is mandatory that the company reports about it. The materiality assessment is a tool to find out about the main impacts, risks, and opportunities that need to be reported. So what is the double in the double materiality assessment? We can see here the two aspects, the two perspectives that form the double materiality. On the left side, we can see the impact materiality, and there we are talking about how business activities have an impact on people and the environment. We also talk about the inside-out view here. On the right side, we have the financial materiality that deals with the financial opportunities and risks that the company is exposed to. And this is also called the outside-in view. The first two standards in ESRS, the ESRS E1 and the ESRS E2, are called cross-cutting standards. As my colleague already mentioned earlier, they are cross-standard disclosure requirements and they are more or less general reporting requirements. For example, ESRS E1 explains the different categories of standards and disclosures under ESRS. For example, there are requirements that relate to governance or to strategy, risk management, or metrics and targets. We have already mentioned, material topics have to be reported in any case. However, if a topic is not mapped in the ESRS but is material according to the materiality assessment, company-specific disclosures are to be defined by the company itself for now. It is to be expected that the standards will continue to develop and that more and more topic-specific standards will be added in the future, so that more and more topics can be reported in a uniform manner. Qualitative requirements for information are also presented here, and the principles are relevance and credible presentation of information, as well as comparability, verifiability, and comprehensibility. As we already talked about, double materiality with the materiality analysis and the materiality of impacts and the financial materiality are also written down in the ESRS E1. Another topic here is the sustainability due diligence, and those results are used to assess material impacts, risks, and opportunities. ESRS E1 also contains requirements regarding value chain and inclusion of material impacts, risks, opportunities of the company's upstream and downstream value chain in the reporting process. In addition, ESRS E1 specifies how sustainability-related information, meaning the preparation and the processing, is to be handled and what requirements for transitional processes exist. ESRS E2 contains requirements that are to be disclosed irrespective of the sector and are to be applied with selected topic-specific standards. These requirements relate to reporting principles, governance, strategy, management of impacts, risks and opportunities, and metrics and targets. On this slide, we can see the 5 environmental standards of ESRS that are currently available in draft form. The ESRS E1 climate change defines what companies have to report on their climate change adaptation and mitigation strategy and measures. This includes, for example, the calculation of the carbon footprint, that means the amount of greenhouse gas emissions in CO2 equivalents emitted by the company. The second environmental standard deals with various types of pollution in air, soil, or water. Here, for example, it is necessary to indicate how many tons or kilograms of pollutants the company emits, but also what measures are planned to reduce them. ESRS E3 covers various topics related to water, for example, withdrawal, consumption, and use, and also a description of how the company discharges consumed or used water into water bodies and how much of it. The company must also address the impact it has on aquatic habitats. Biodiversity and ecosystems are a topic of the ESRS E4. Here, companies must report, for example, which specific targets and measures for prevention or reduction they have set themselves and by when. The fifth environmental standard deals with resource inflows and outflows and also waste in relation to products and services. Under the social standards, companies have to provide information on their workforce, both on their own workforce, as we see in S1, and as well on those in their value chain, S2. Examples of specific metrics are training hours per employee or the number of work-related accidents. According to S3, companies are required to engage with communities that are affected by the company's activities. And under the fourth social standard, companies report about consumers and end users. Finally, the standards concerning governance. Here we have one standard that is titled Business Conduct. And according to the disclosure requirements in G1, information has to be provided on corporate culture, protection of whistleblowers, but also on animal welfare or relationship with suppliers. Using ESRS E1 as an example, I would like to briefly show how the topic-specific standards can be used. That means all those we have just seen before, those that can be found in topic areas E, S, or G. The content of the E1 can be divided into 4 sections: governance, strategy, impact, risk and opportunity management, and metrics and targets, each of which contains different numbers of disclosure requirements. The disclosure requirements in the governance section relates to ESRS 2 and, for example, the integration of sustainability-related performance in incentive systems. We also find a link to ESRS 2 in the strategy section and in impact, risk, and opportunity management. Otherwise, we see chronologically continuous disclosure requirements 1 to 9 within the ESRS E1. The names of the 4 sections indicate which type of disclosure requirement can be found in them. And for example, in the strategy section, E1 requires disclosure of a transition plan and some type of mitigation strategy. In metrics and targets, the focus is on the collection of key figures and the setting of targets, as we see in the second line, for example. In E1, 5, energy consumption and mix. Here, among other things, the amount of electricity consumed by the company in megawatt hours in a year is to be indicated. There is also quite detailed information on how exactly these figures are to be recorded and presented. With this insight into the ESRS E1, that's it already for today's webcast. If you are interested in more ESG webcasts, we already have 3 webcasts on ESG basics, sustainable finance, and EU taxonomy regulation. We will upload more webcasts on a regular basis. Feel free to stay tuned with us and be excited about the upcoming webcasts. We would like to thank you very much for watching our ESG webcast, and we are looking forward to you joining us again for the next webcast.